What's up, CMG 360? This is myself, Tyree Laird.
Seth, Mackley.
Schow.
And together we did compaction piles, sand compaction piles for our topic. I'm going to go over an introduction of what sand compaction piles is, and we'll go from there. So sand compactions are piles that are driven into the soils. It could be great for using them on coast sides. I know Japan uses them for their beaches because due to the earthquake, and it acts as a drain for stack loading and accelerate primary consolidation. The United States, however, has adjusted these techniques. They have switched over to what they call now wick drains for drainage systems. And in sandy grounds, the sand compaction method is mainly the countermeasure against liquefaction, and its effectiveness in preventing liquefaction has been confirmed through the past of large earthquakes, showing that it's a method, the most reliable ground improvement method. So I'm going to move it on to a case with the history of sand compaction piles.
So for these piles, it was first developed in Japan in 1957. It was originally made for onshore construction, for making the soil compaction and the base of, let's say, a construction site more stable. And like Tyree was saying, it proved after putting it in 1957 that it was useful against earthquakes. There was actually an earthquake on the first project that they put it into years later. And they ran some tests after the earthquake, and it ended up showing that the foundation in which it was placed under held up to its strain. And so at the beginning, the first process that they came up with was the vibrating process. They're pretty much vibrating these piles straight into the ground below what would be the foundation that would go up on top of them. And like I will say later on in the presentation, the problem with this is that the vibration, depending on where it was at, if there's any existing structures alongside it, it would affect the stability of the foundations next to it. So they moved on from that as the years went on to non-vibrating piles, which would make it so the piles could just be pounded in, and it wouldn't have these side effects like the previous used vibrating process.
All right, so the process for these sand compaction piles is basically that the driving device that's on the crane is used to, push into the soil. The compaction is achieved by using the sand to displace the previous soil down and out, so it strengthens and densifies the soil near it. The amount of compaction depends on the spacing of the piles, the size of the piles, and how much vibrating energy is used on the piles. And so for the vibrating process, a hollow steel casing with a false bottom is pushed into the ground. When it's pushed to its required depth, the sand is then introduced into the casing. Usually it's introduced by a loader. And once the sand reaches a specific level in the casing is then lifted up. And as the casing is lifted up, the sand fills in the void that's left behind. Then while the sand is filling up that void, the casing is then vibrated, and then it densifies the sand inside. So here on this picture, it's basically the entire idea of compaction pile, or the sand compaction piles. It's just used to compact the soil around it, and then increases the bearing capacity of the soil around the sand. The sand compaction piles don't actually carry the load. It's basically just used to densify the soil around it. All right. So we have a little video for you guys. It's 2 minutes, and it just shows the process of the compaction pile.
So I'll go over what type of construction is used with these compaction piles. As you can see, definitely used for storage yards and steel mills, embankments for roads and railways, and storage tanks and power plants and petroleum industries. So now we go down to the advantages of compaction piles. Um, Sand piles are more considerably cheaper and faster than any other compaction piling. You can use stone, you can use concrete or grout. This is considerably more expensive than any of the other options. Um, and also, sand piles give the possibility of surrounding soil from intruding into the pile itself, which is definitely a benefit for sure. And then we'll move on to disadvantages.
So for the disadvantages, the sand piles have a low stiffness, which requires a large percentage of replacement soil. They also do not have a high permeability, and so these piles cannot act as vertical drains during earthquakes. The other disadvantage is the vibrations that are created when they're vibrated into the ground. It can affect surrounding structures, foundations, which could ultimately shift the soil foundations for other buildings or structures that are alongside the project or wherever you're piling or drilling these piles in. And the piles can also be damaged pretty easy with when they are being vibrated or driven in. It's very easy to break the piles. Also, another one is the heavy machinery that is used for these piles. You have to think about where your job site's at and if you can fit in different types of machines in order to successfully drive these piles into the ground. So the next thing is the equipment that's used. So the first thing that you'll need to have is the crawler crane. This is the adequate crane to use so you can move from different positions on the site. You also need a front end loader so you can compact the sand into the casing pipes. It also has a skip bucket, the casing pipe, vibrator, which is at the top, that ends up ultimately vibrating the pile into the ground. And then there's also a spring shock absorber. So when this is vibrating up and down, it absorbs the shock from the vibrator, so it's not going out of control. And there's also power and air lines. This is the power line's the main power that is controlling the vibrator at the top of the crane. And then the air line is coming from the compressor that's at the back of the crane. And then also guide leads. The next one is safety.
So safety is going to be your one of the biggest priorities on the job site, and this is to improve safety. We can consider the stability of the ground when putting these casings into the ground, knowing that your surface area is dry and not slippery, like where you can't trip easy. So a way you can prevent this is scaffold walkways and handrails. And then also another one is you got heavy machinery that is very tall, and such as the crane. Keeping a safe distance from these heavy machinery, staying with the casing, being caught in between and struck by, and this can be prevented by easy access around job site and enough space around the pile driving. So I will move it to Seth for.
So all in all, the sand compaction piles are actually a pretty decent way to increase the bearing capacity of soil. It's not that widely known about, and there's not a lot of information on it, but in Japan, it's a very, very well known technique, and it's done very well for them. And even in America, we've kind of developed upon it. So even now, that technique's gone and helped develop even more solutions to compaction. So it's really something to look forward to, and hopefully that it still remains a decent technique. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.